So today I wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on with Junior. If you remember back in June, I had x-rays done for him, and I'll have the link to that is right up here. And those x-rays for him were to assess his knees, growth, and if the growth plates had closed enough for me to start getting him going under saddle. Well, what we also did at that time was had his front feet x-rayed, and I mentioned that in the video, that one of them we've always known is a club foot, and so we x-rayed that just to make sure that the angles were looking okay, and also x-rayed the other front foot. Found that the front foot was a little bit flatter. The angles were what you might call just more of a flat foot. So there was initially no really concern about what that meant for him. The vet just made a protocol to change the angle of that flat foot a little bit. He really liked how the farrier work was looking on the club foot. He said, let's just change the angle of the flat. So shortly after that vet visit, I consulted my farrier, and she was able to just do a very slight adjustment. And after the first cycle, was done, everything seemed fine. About 5-6 weeks later, we were nearing the end of that first cycle. He started seeming really tender-footed, is what I was saying when I'd walk him up and down the driveway. So I'd walk him on the gravel a little bit, and he seemed just a little, a little gimpy, a little ouchy every couple steps. So nothing super dramatic. He seemed okay once he was on the field. I didn't notice it in his stall. He was okay in the round pen. So chalked it up to being a little tender-footed. So then as we get closer to his trim, he was suddenly seeming tender-footed in the round pen as well. And the round pen has a couple of rocks, but it's really, I wouldn't say it's rocky, but there's a couple of, random rocks in there. So I was thinking, okay, well, maybe he's hitting a little rock here and there. But the chances of that, and for how often I was seeing that little off step, seemed a little bit low. So the shoer, she came, and I didn't end up being able to be here. I was at work, so my friend held the horses for me. So I ended up having to have a conversation with my shoer on the phone later just to understand what was going on. She noticed that he, as she said, was lame on both front feet when she took him out and trimmed him. And she did hoof testers and everything on his feet. Didn't notice any sort of reaction to anything. So he also seemed to be lame intermittently both front feet after the trim as well. So after that conversation, I started kind of getting in my head like maybe we were going to need to look at shoes for him, because both the vet at the time of the x-rays said that perhaps he was going to eventually need shoes once he was going under saddle. So that thought was already kind of there. And then the shoer had also mentioned maybe that he just needs front shoes. Me and my farrier both were lenient on doing that. He's so small still. His feet are tiny, and we didn't really want to put shoes on a baby per se just yet if we didn't have to. So under her guidance, we researched doing the Easy Cloud boots, like Renegades or another brand, Cavallos, all of those kinds of supportive boots. Well, before investing in that, I had the opportunity to borrow some Renegades from a friend for sizing primarily. And I put them on him. Of course, he's kind of in between sizes. And I put them on and put him in the round pen. And initially that day, he seemed just a touch kind of ouchy. After I put the boots on, he seemed like he kind of got used to the feeling of them, and then stepped into the lope on his own, where previously he wasn't really even wanting to get into the trot. So that was notable, but I couldn't really continue working him in it because the boots didn't really fit properly. So I kind of have that in my head. Meanwhile, I am waiting on a vet appointment with my vet. I think it was like a week and a half out that we had to wait for. And that was scheduled just as a lameness exam with the same vet who helped him when he colicked this last winter. There's a link to that if you want to watch that. And then also the same vet that did the x-rays for him. And so and all of his shots and all of that. So this vet knows Junior just about as well as he could, because he's rolling over here. Cute little man. So anyway, this is the same vet that has seen Junior pretty much the entire time that I've owned him. Anyway, so the vet comes out finally to do the lameness exam, and I explain all of this history to him again. And he recalls when Junior was there for the x-rays, that he wasn't really moving out very well in the round pen when he watched him. And that was definitely true. But the footing at the vet clinic doesn't really have any footing. It's very compacted and hard, and like grass has grown in and stuff. So we kind of chalked it up to the footing there was not ideal to really see him really reach. And of course he asked, you know, does he move better at home? And I said, yes, he does. He reaches a lot better in my round pen. So we didn't explore that at the time. But when he came and did the lameness exam here, we put him in the round pen and we walked and trotted him up the driveway, did the full gauntlet for a lameness exam. And he still thought that it looked like he wasn't really reaching through with the front end. Long story short of this, I give you all this history just to know that we've been exploring some options for a little while now. But he kind of went two ways on here. He says either your horse, he said I could just advise that you just leave him alone for 6 months and let him keep growing and come back in the spring and reevaluate. And but he said I kind of feel like that's kind of a cheap diagnosis for you. He knows that I'm very invested in my horses, and I do a lot with them, and I think he kind of knew that I wouldn't feel okay just ignoring this potential issue. But that was the one thing, because he didn't find any other direct lameness anywhere in the soft tissues or anything like that. So what he did say that he was leaning towards the belief of was Junior being having EPM. And EPM is a neurological parasite that actually ends up becoming a disease. And forgive me if I don't give 100% accurate information on this type of issue with horses. I'm not a veterinarian, and I've really only read about EPM like in magazines and stuff. So I have been doing quite a bit more research, obviously, since the other day when he informed me of that. But his reasoning for that diagnosis was the fact that Junior is intermittently lame on one or both or one or the other foot. And watching him move around at the lope, often he'll do kind of what I call bunny hop on the back end. And it's always in the same spot of the round pen. So I've always kind of chalked it up to a lot of horses don't like the end of the round pen that's near our swimming pool, for example. Also, the footing gets a little bit deeper over there, and so they always kind of rush through that spot. And I've always kind of just chalked it up to him being young and unbalanced, and he'd kind of do that couple little hops and then level back out into the lope. But that, coupled with some of this front end issue, he was thinking it was looking a little bit neurological. He did some other tests with him, of course, in hand and feeling along, and he said if it is neurological, it's fairly mild. But of course, if it's EPM, then it's a lot better to address this earlier rather than later. So he ended up giving Junior a 1-month treatment. He said what a lot of people will do is they give them a 3-dose. Hey, buddy. A 3-dose type deal. But he said he'd rather kind of treat this a little bit more aggressively from the start. So he is on this 3-dose paste initially, and then so he's on this 3-dose paste, and then we'll be on a month-long oral dosage as well until that's ran through. And then the vet said to just continue monitoring him, and we'll reevaluate after the month. So What I will say, because I've had a lot of online friends and personal friends on my social media pages asking about if they've ran any sort of test to confirm the EPM or not. I asked the vet about doing a blood draw, and he said that he didn't feel that that was necessary at this time, and that it's not always very definitive. And the only other thing that you can do to really confirm it is to have a spinal tap done and take some cerebral spinal fluid, and my vet doesn't actually do that procedure, so he didn't think that this was serious enough as of yet to proceed with that route. So I believe after the end of this month of dosage is when we'll explore some of those other things and see if some of these symptoms are still relevant, and kind of go from there. I did just want to add that there are some other kind of goofy things that Junior does every now and then. Sometimes he stops, like if I bring him into a stall and then halt him, he'll kind of stop with his front feet crossed over. Or like he kind of does like these funny head tilts, especially if I'm like brushing him up by his ears. He'll kind of like tilt, and I've always kind of thought it was just him like getting into the brushing. But he just kind of has some of these other goofy mannerisms that I've kind of chalked up to his personality and or youthfulness. But with this diagnosis or potential diagnosis, it does make me question if some of those are other kind of neurological signs. The other thing I was going to mention was the vet did note some asymmetry in his hindquarters. Actually, his right hip, if you look at the hip bones, they are level, but there's less muscle tone on the right side. And you'll see, I'm going to share some videos of him moving in the round pen, that he just doesn't travel as well when he's going to the right. He kind of dives down a lot. And as the vet noticed, he thought that the hips, it looks like the hind end wants to drive and the front end just kind of doesn't come through. So I'll be really interested to see some of your opinions on his movement, and if you've had EPM horses in the past, or if you currently do, and how some of this movement might compare to your own horses. So I'm going to go ahead and share some video clips of him now. Good boy. Well, thank you so much for following along in this video. If you like the content, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel to never miss any other videos of my horses or the show life or anything else going on the farm. Hopefully this diagnosis for Junior is sound, and we have something to move forward with. But as always, I appreciate you following along and watching, and I'll see you again in another video.